There's no growth unless we're getting out of our comfort zone. And so it's pretty easy, in the more successful and potentially older that you get into fewer situations where you're uncomfortable. And in fact, you build a whole world that reduces any discomfort. And, but I think the opposite is true, is that you're not growing unless you are able to point to moments of discomfort, on a weekly, monthly basis.
Welcome back to the 167 podcast. Super excited that you're here, and also super excited that you are here. We are joined together today with a special friend of mine, a guest, to talk about life and leadership and business and service. Everybody, this is Patrick Colletti. Patrick, welcome aboard. So glad you're here today.
Thanks, Dave. This is fun.
Yeah, you are. You're one of the most interesting people I know in my life. We're going to talk about service and leadership and maybe a little bit of your bio, but I do have to throw out a disclaimer here. You are the second guest ever on this podcast, but at best, you will only be the second best guest.
I'm used to that, so no worries.
Last week's guest was my wife, Brooke, and so she's at the top of the chart, right? And everyone else is down below that. But hey, so for everybody, will you just give us a little bit of a background on some of your leadership experience, where you've led in the corporate world, your sort of corporate life? Let everybody know who you are a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So got my first opportunity to lead at the age of 27. And it was kind of a trial by fire. I had joined a .com startup, and that startup failed. Got a call from the chairman. He said, "Hey, listen, everybody's laid off. If you want to stick around, and your partner, your CTO partner, want to stick around for 60 days, we'll fund it. And if not, you're fired too." And that's...
What was that like in that moment? Do you remember that?
It was terrifying.
I know you've told the story 1,000 times.
Yeah.
But
it was terrifying, and I'm always... I want to always be clear that there were not a lot of heroics. We didn't hear the music and decide this was the time.
Was the audible voice of God telling you, stay, Patrick?
Yeah, so that definitely didn't happen. But we did put one foot in front of the other, and it turned out to be a beautiful journey. And I led NetHealth for 2 decades. And
so you led it out of 60 days from closing the doors and just shuttering everything down.
There were just 2 of us.
2 of you guys.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but it was a beautiful story. It is a beautiful story. And kind of went on that journey from 0 to $1 billion over 20 years. And it is it's a lovely company that does important things, NetHealth. Mm-hmm. And
what kind of space do they work in? What does NetHealth do?
So healthcare software, and specifically a couple business lines. One's physical therapy. Okay. So if you've ever had physical therapy before, you've gone in. We have predictive analytics that can essentially tell you exactly how quickly you should heal, whether you're a NFL quarterback or whether you're a 90-year-old grandmother.
No. Okay.
And so specifically what you need to do.
Wow.
So software for that, chronic wound care is another one, which is, diabetic ulcers are kind of like the modern day lepers. People who have these chronic wounds, they don't heal. And so this year there'll be 100,000 amputations that will occur, which are unnecessary.
Connected to diabetes? Mm-hmm. Okay.
So we created a system called Wound Expert, which is used in hospitals and healthcare facilities all around the United States today to basically predict exactly what you need to do. So doctors and nurses use that to come up with a care plan and ultimately heal patients. And we've done that for millions and millions and millions. And we do that for more than 3 million people a year currently.
So you were a part of the revolution where software came alongside of healthcare and helped people.
I like to think of it that way.
Yeah. NetHealth. That's a beautiful thing. I love. So why I say that you are one of the most interesting people in the world is there was an example of it just a few minutes ago or a few seconds ago. You said it's a lovely company. Like that's one of your words. Lovely.
I do like that word. Yeah. I use the word love a good bit.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I just think that's interesting because I don't hear that a lot. I love your approach to stuff. I love the way you describe a lovely company still doing important work. You were a part of that journey, and you have written a book You want to plug the book too right now? Shamelessly plug the book.
Yes, the book's called Refounder, and essentially, I don't think my story is interesting enough for a book. But what I did is I went out and found other leaders who were refounders. They maybe didn't start the place that they worked, but they kind of refounded it, and so interviewed people who were doing city renewal, people in healthcare, people in education, people who were taking large entrenched problems and facing them head on, and got to interview those people, learn a lot, and kind of research what it means to be a refounder. Got to take that work to Carnegie Mellon University, teach some classes. That was a blast.
Yep. Around the world, right?
And, that's right. Yep. I've taught in a couple continents for Carnegie Mellon, which is fun.
Yeah.
And gotten to take the story there as well.
Yeah. So at Project 167, we have 3 focal points. And I think I'm leading this in so our audience understands why is Patrick a guest today? We talk about relationships, marriage, dating relationships, those kind of things. This is where we spend all of our other 167 hours outside of our hour we spend in church. We talk about parenting. Brooke and I talked about parenting last in the episode, but we also need to talk about work and where we spend a good bit of our time, whether it's 35, 40, 60 hours. When some people tell me they work 80 hours, I'm like, that's a lot of hours. I don't know if you really work 80 hours. It might feel like 80 hours. And I think we work a lot of our hours mentally at home as well. But here's what I'm getting at. I don't think the church talks about work enough. I don't think we uncover what is theology like in the workplace, in the marketplace. And that's why you're here to help flesh some of this out. So I wanted people to, I don't want you're not bragging about your bona fides, but you are establishing you've been in the marketplace from a number of different angles. You've been around the world, and I know your faith is a big part of who you are at the workplace. You don't check your faith at the door, become work Patrick, and then on your way out, hey, make sure you grab that because I got to go be a loving husband or a lovely husband. See what I did there?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I like
so
it.
Can you talk about like theology and work, just sort of generally, and then we'll dive in further from there?
Yeah, absolutely. There is no way to bifurcate these things. I'm guilty of it, though. All of us are.
Me too.
No doubt. But it should pervade every element of what you do. One of the easiest ways to think about that is, we believe in strengths. We believe in gifting as believers, right? That's absolutely core.
Yeah.
And so kind of knowing what those strengths are, knowing what your gifting is, and then taking ownership of that and doing that really, really well, that's a way to do faith and work.
How did you encourage that uniquely at Net Health? Because I know the way you led was not like the is it Dale Carnegie School of Leadership, that sort of like do this, and this. You were much more creative, I think, and sort of out of the box around strengths and people in theology. Yeah,
so early on, I was really profoundly impacted by some teachings I got from the Pittsburgh Leadership Foundation and unpacking our DISC profiles, our strengths, and kind of getting an understanding of that. And for me, what it meant was I didn't have to fake it. So imagine me 27, 28, 29, trying to lead a board of directors, absolutely not knowing what I'm doing, but pretending I did, and going into those board meetings acting like I had to be an expert on legal things, technology things, sales and marketing and staff and HR and development.
Like you had to have the answer.
That's how I felt.
Or act like you got the answer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't show any weakness.
Exactly.
We all feel that way.
So,
can we all just acknowledge that? Yeah, go ahead. Keep going. Sorry.
And it's an unfortunate lie. And so through the training that I got early on, I recognized that I'm really, really bad at a lot of things, but I'm really good at like one or two. And being able to step into it and acknowledge, it's freeing. Actually, I am really good. Now, look, we're talking about out of a set of maybe 30 things.
Right.
I'm great at one or two, and I'm really profoundly awful at so many others.
Okay.
But acknowledging that and realizing that you can step into that and try to get more at-bats at the things that you're really great at, and recognizing other people have other gifts, allow them to step into those gifts as well. For me, that was really freeing. And ultimately, we created a class for every new employee. We did groups of 10 to 12, and we trained everybody on strengths. And we had breakthrough goals where every single employee would get to go through this, and they would actually present a story of their future self. So it was kind of tell a story 12 months in advance, kind of what you've learned and what you've done with it. And we would sit there, the CFO, the COO, the CTO, and then we would write on little Post-it notes.
The C-suite folks
Yeah.
are there listening to these stories.
That's right, in groups of 10 or 12. And, it's extraordinary to see somebody hand trembling, getting up and telling a story of their future self based on what they've learned, both in terms of what they're going to do professionally and personally. And it's profound. And so there's that vulnerability in that moment. So we ran that program for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. I don't know how many, 700 people or more went through something just like that.
So what I'm hearing you say, so connecting some dots here, when it comes to like theology and how do I function as a Christian while I'm at work, it's connected to knowing our strengths, being vulnerable to acknowledge our weaknesses, lean into our strengths, and trust other people in their areas of strength. You don't have to be all things, like all 34 strengths or whatever they are in the Strengths Finder.
It's a mirror of the gospel story, right? I mean, we're hands, we're feet, we're different body parts, and we're acknowledging that. And so it's just taking that very basic understanding that we ought to have and applying it to the places we live, work, and play.
So I would have given you points. That was our old mission statement, where we live, work, and play. So
I've used that many, many times.
But I love that because connecting the dots back this past weekend, John Riley taught about service, the way of Jesus. Jesus was wrapping a towel around his waist, washing feet, right? The job or the responsibility that was typically reserved for the lowest ranking servant, right? And here's Jesus doing this. What do you think? What are your thoughts about service and how we can be thinking about service when it comes to our work, whatever our work is? Because you could work. My wife, she works at home. She's a stay-at-home mom. That's work to her. She's not absent from the call to serve during the week, right? So thoughts on service, long-winded paragraph question. Thoughts on service.
So the first thing, I recognized from John's sermon was when he was talking about service was he was kind of turning it inside out and saying, in order to serve, because the easy thing to do is say, okay, let's just serve more, serve harder, et cetera, is we need to be served first. And it was a little bit of a different place than I thought he was going, but I thought it was a great call out. And I would say, maybe check yourself and ask, when is the last time you let the walls down and allowed somebody to help you? Because it's very difficult. And my hunch is that the more successful you become, the more that answer is, I don't let anybody help me, or I don't need anybody to help me, or I don't want to burden them. We've got the time and resources to take care of ourselves, but there's a hardness to that. And I would say that, he was onto something there. And I think there's a really beautiful model when you are publicly being served. And I'll use an example for anybody who can't stand all the proliferation of software systems like Slack. Slack's kind of old at this point, but I can't stand Slack. And I remember when Slack was a new thing, and
it was the rage.
It was the thing, right?
Yeah.
And after a while, I'm like, I don't really get it. But I had a partner of mine went and literally got trained by younger people at the company on how to use Slack. And next thing you know, he was slacking all the time. So while that may have been a little annoying in and of itself, he wasn't afraid to put himself into a posture of learning. And can you imagine what that showed, the rest of the people who were teaching him? So I think John was onto something when he brought up, first we ought to acknowledge we need to be served as well. And if you can't do that, it's going to be a hindrance to you serving.
Do you remember we had a comedian here years ago at Northway, Michael Jr.? I don't know if you remember that or not. He's like a nationally known comedian. He taught on the weekend, did some comedy stuff. Anyways, he did a Sunday evening callback. It was like a little bit of a concert. Comedians call their work concerts?
No.
Okay, yeah, they do. So fun fact. But he said, I don't think we have a giving problem as much as we have a receiving problem. He was talking about his albums out there. If you don't have $20, take one.
Yeah.
He said, but most of you won't because we have a receiving problem. I think that's a really fantastic observation about we struggle to be served. Especially at the workplace where strength is the word. And
we do.
Independence.
We do.
Okay, I interrupted you. Keep
No,
going.
I want to go back to service though. I think I often get the opportunity to speak to people in college and 20-somethings who are looking for some career advice. And, one of the first things I think about is an experience I had with the Fellows Program. And, consistently what I found from them was they were willing to volunteer. And so, picture yourself, you're in a meeting and there's, 10 or 15 people in the meeting and everybody's talking about to-dos and kind of follow-ups. And then, you're looking for somebody to step in and do something. And usually one of two things happens. You ask for help and people all of a sudden have a text message they need to look at on their phone.
They're busy.
Or they got to write something down really quick. And I experienced this at Carnegie Mellon as well. When I ask a question and people put their head down, I know what that means. I mean, we know what you're doing. But instead, I've had the experience where people put themselves in a vulnerable position to say, I'll do it. And, common, cynical, sarcastic reality is, don't be that person, right? But putting yourself into a posture of a servant and raising your hand to help is beautiful. And furthermore, it gets you noticed.
Yeah, and yes, it does. But isn't it funny how the reason why we don't raise our hand is because we're calculating the ROI on, will this advance me? Is this enough? Do I like this? Who's all going to be there? Yeah. When really over time, service is noticed.
Service is noticed.
Service is noticed. But that's not the motive for
It's
serving.
not the motive.
Yeah.
The reality is somebody needs help. There's a project that needs assistance. Somebody's got to do what we think of as grunt work. And then the reality is, regardless of how high performing you are and what kind of organization you run, there's always service. There's always somebody that still needs to volunteer. So whether you're a C-level person or you're an intern, it's all the same.
Yeah. We were chatting about a mutual friend who's going to be a future guest on our podcast. I don't know if you know this. You described, I love serving him. Can you just unpack why that was your verbiage?
Yeah, I mean,
because he doesn't view it that way.
Yeah, this person in particular, I try to be attuned to what the Lord is doing, and I try to be patient and kind of find out what my next job is, and whether that is, on an hour-by-hour basis or kind of thinking out over the next 5 years or 10 years what I want to do. And so I find that when I'm peaceful and patient and paying attention, there are always things for me to do. And this is one fellow I met recently, and I'm amazed by kind of what's going on with him, and there just seems to be a special anointing on him. And so it's just an honor to kind of serve him and walk alongside him as he builds this idea. I'm pretty excited.
Yeah, he's, like I said, he's going to be a future guest on the podcast, so we won't give too much away, but I'm super excited about. So here's where I get curious, because I'm always listening to, how does Patrick say this? Why would he say it this way? Peaceful, patient, and paying attention. I don't think that describes most people in their 9 to 5. Does it? It feels like it's all the opposites.
I think, I can often feel the opposite.
Anxious, hurried, concerned, overwhelmed. Like, so how do we get there? You started leading the company 27. All that weight is on your shoulder. Like, how did you grow into peaceful, patient, paying attention so that you can, because I think there are opportunities to serve. John talked about this, right? But we don't see them. Yeah. So how do you get to this space while at work?
Yeah, I mean, first caveat would be...
this is your next book, by the way.
This was certainly not me at 27, 30, 31, 35, even 40. I'd say I've been practicing, the way. I've been attempting to do things like read the Word and journal the Word. I've been trying.
Are you a big journaler?
I have been. Okay. There's ages where I've journaled every single day.
Seasons.
And and there's times that I haven't. Right now, I happen to be in a journaling phase.
Okay.
So taking quiet time, solitude, enjoying God's creation. So literally going on a walk, seeing nature, smelling the air, and just kind of enjoying what's out there. It's hard on a day like today when it's 15, 20 degrees. But those are all practices. And then, I'd say most importantly, beginning to take your Sundays more seriously.
How so?
You know, it's not a shock, but for many people, they kind of act like it is. But this is a day that's meant to be set apart. And I don't want to do wordplay here. If you want to do it on Monday or Saturday, it doesn't really matter. But taking deliberate time to rest, to contemplate, to get off your phone, to get away from the things that feel like work. It's a struggle, but it always pays off. And so trying to get into that kind of rhythm of renewal, recognizing that one day is a setup day. I mean, it's very clear that we should do this. And if we do it and we do it well, then all of a sudden the other 6 days it's game on.
Because it preps you leading into your 6 days, but it's also on the end of your 6 days to look forward to.
Yeah, absolutely.
With beautiful rhythm.
It's a celebration.
It is a celebration. Yeah. I've heard that Sunday evenings, 6 o'clock is the most anxious 2 or 3 hours of our lives because school is tomorrow or work is tomorrow. I got to pack lunches tomorrow or I got to go have a meeting. But you're saying there is something called a Sabbath on that day that if practiced with rhythm and practiced with celebration can change some of that.
It's a beautiful thing.
It is a beautiful thing. So I'm going to change gears just a little bit. When I mentioned words, lovely was one of them. And the other word that I've heard you talk about, and then I heard someone you talk about this. This was someone else that you meet with or met with. This is the word gravitas. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you unpack that word? I don't think most people have heard that word or know the meaning of it, and what it sounds like isn't actually what it means. So I don't know if this is connected to service, but I'm just interested. So
yeah, I mean, when I think of gravitas, usually I would think of that as very high compliment.
Okay.
And it is a Latin word, and there's a weightiness to it, a heaviness to it. There's also, think of the word gravitate, leaders that people gravitate towards.
Okay.
And so there's a compelling element to the word, gravity, gravitas, gravitate. And, I think it's one of those things when you see it in somebody, they have a certain earnestness, they have a certain sincerity, they have a level of integrity that's really clear. They mean what they say what they mean. If they tell you they're going to do something, they do that thing. And I think it's a compelling feature of anybody who wants to lead.
How do you move towards that in your life at work?
I think one of the first ways is that, consider your words. Words really, really matter. I gravitate on the side of attractional. And so, with the words that you use, whether you're in meetings, whether you're with your family, let your words be attractional. Be careful. I would strongly recommend, and I recommend this to anybody who wants to hear about it, is avoid cynicism. Cynicism is dangerous. Sarcasm, joking around with some friends in a good way, lovely, different, wonderful thing to do. Yeah. But sarcasm, particularly in the workplace or even at home, cynicism at the workplace or at home, they are not going to gain you any followers, and in fact, they're going to create detractors. So I'd say being really intentional about the usage of our words. We don't hear this word earnest too often anymore.
Ernest Goes to Camp is the last time I heard that word. Do you remember that
I
one?
forgot about that movie.
Hey, real quick on the sarcasm thing. It's so funny because, sorry, I messed you up right there, but I want to hear about Ernest, right? This is what I do, right? Sarcasm it'll get you a laugh, right? But it doesn't increase your influence.
Agree.
I think that's such a big thing because the internet and social media is fed often on sarcasm, right? And so we're living in a culture that values it, but yet really it doesn't play well at work.
Yeah, it's pretty easy. I mean, Andy Crouch wrote a book about this as well, about culture making. And it's the idea that, you can criticize it, or you can run away from it, or you can create it. And so the same thing I think is true as we apply this to work is, if you're sincere, if you're earnest, if you're part of the group that's kind of mocking and making fun of the folks that are in charge or just ran that meeting, or that person who was vulnerable enough to make a presentation, if you're part of that group, it's not going to go real well for you for too long. I also think when I think of gravitas and I think about work, I think about being known for doing really great work. So, if you want to put a label on yourself and tell people about your faith and then not do a great job at work, my view is like, just please don't, right? Be known for great work. And then if you get the opportunity to open your mouth, go ahead and open your mouth. Do a great job at the things that you're given and do really well with those things. And be known for it.
So work hard, do excellent work, pay attention to those things. And that, I think that creates opportunities to share what's your foundation, what's different about you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think John Riley had this quote. I wrote it down here. People need to see a living faith and doing great work with earnestness, minding our words, not just choosing cynicism and sarcasm. That's evidence of a living faith. Yeah. He said people need to see a living faith before they're going to believe in a living God. Yeah,
let me play on that for a moment too.
Yeah.
And I like to think about the walking around life. And, as you're going, as you're coming, when you're reclining at the table, et cetera.
Yeah.
But in our day, what that means is blend it. And so with the people that you work with, do things, do normal things.
Like go get a coffee.
Go get a coffee.
Yeah.
Go run an errand together if you have the opportunity.
Yeah.
For so long, I worked in the Strip District, and if I had a 30-minute meeting with somebody and it was a casual meeting, I'd say, hey, you know what? I need to go get a chocolate bar for Jen. Do you mind, running down to the chocolate place in the Strip? No, that sounds good. And then what ends up happening is,
you did that with me one time.
You're living real life. I mean, you're walking down the street, you're crossing the street, you're going and you're doing something, but you're talking. You're not just sitting across from somebody at the desk where there's a power dynamic. It's just unnecessary. So I'd say blending as much of your walking around life as you can is helpful as well.
We were in East Liberty at a PLF leadership development opportunity, and I remember, I think I'd known you then, but you're like, hey, do you want to walk and get a coffee? Yeah.
It sounds like something I do.
It is something you did. And we walked, and I think we were late back to the other session, but it was brilliant being able to engage with you and interact with you. You're walking around life. Yeah. I don't think we pay enough attention to that. Thanks. Probably because we have running around lives.
Agree.
Yeah. Yeah. So gravitas, coffee. Another time that I met you and hung out with you, you are a coffee. Can I say connoisseur? You are I
really enjoy.
I don't want to be cynical, not a snob, but you like and study good coffee.
Yeah, I love it.
What are you drinking right now? Can you share for all the listeners who love good coffee as well?
Yeah, Jen actually volunteered.
Jen
this
is your
morning.
wife,
Yeah,
right?
Jen's my awesome wife.
Not Heather, Jen.
And she made a Chemex this morning, which is a beautiful glass vessel that makes enough for two people. And
Chemex sounds like Breaking Bad to me.
It does seem. It has a weird name.
Yeah, because someone was talking. They were making fun of because I drink.
Yeah.
A Keurig. That doesn't sound. I know. I just.
Can you edit that?
They're gonna need to cut that out.
Please edit that out.
What is Chemex? It does. It sounds like.
Okay, so this is a beautiful glass vessel,
okay.
And I think it was popularized in the 60s, and you just put a little filter on top. You've got a handheld kettle. You put the grinds in, you pour it. It's wonderful.
So it's like a pour-over style?
It's a pour-over for two.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why is it called Chemex?
That's the name of the company that started it. I mean, I know, but it's been around a long time. They've sold millions.
Words create worlds.
Yeah.
So I'm a big words guy, too. Yeah. So when you say that, I'm like, what does that mean? Why?
I'll call it coffee in a carafe.
Whatever. I don't know. So your wife made coffee. And by the way, I joked because one time I misnamed Miss Jen. I called her Heather from a mutual friend or a friend I had back in Ohio. So that was an inside joke. And people were like, do you know her name? Yes, I do know your wife's name. You served at Night to Shine. How was that? Yeah, I know you guys have both served there a couple of times. Like, can you unpack that? I know that's a curveball question.
It's overwhelming, and I would say each year I start to get nervous about. Well, when I see the notice for it, I get this immediate reaction. I've got to do that. It's so great, and then I have a second one. Ooh, it's a bit out of my comfort zone. And this
I
year,
think there's a lot of people that would identify with what you just said. And I'll say this too. We talk about freedom prayer at Northway. There's a lot of people who are like, ooh, I'm apprehensive about that.
Yeah.
Sorry. I just wanted to.
Yeah. I
call
mean,
that
so,
out.
but it's all of that. And
Thanks for being real.
you know, the day
Yeah.
of, I'm thinking about it as I'm getting dressed and, putting on a tie and getting excited and just thinking about who am I going to be paired with? And, there's kind of the adrenaline and enthusiasm of, I'm really going to make sure they have an amazing night. Like it's going to be beautiful.
Yeah.
But then inevitably, you get some nerves. This year was my third year, and it was the easiest in terms of that fear being, reduced prior to. But it was also probably the most difficult year I've had, just in terms of being a host.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. But being uncomfortable
Yeah.
is always a part of service.
It's pretty important.
Yeah. And we should be willing to lean into that, is what I hear you saying.
Big time.
Yeah.
I think there's no.
You were locked
no
in.
growth.
I saw you.
Yeah, I was locked
Say
in.
it. There's no growth.
Yeah.
Say it.
Yeah, I mean, really, there's no growth unless we're getting out of our comfort zone. And so it's pretty easy in the more successful and potentially older that you get into fewer situations where you're uncomfortable. And in fact, you build a whole world that reduces any discomfort. And, but I think the opposite is true, is that you're not growing unless you are able to point to moments of discomfort, on a weekly, monthly basis.
Yeah, that's probably true. Work life, marriage life, parenting life. I know recently I had to have a conversation with our kids that was like a uncomfortable subject matter, but it was good, but it was hard, right?
It is.
I don't want to have to talk about this.
Yeah.
Do we really have to talk about this
Yeah.
right now?
Yeah, I don't think we ever really achieve a place or a space in life where that's done. The myth of making it in a particular way and not having to deal with that.
Yeah.
It's true with family. It's true with work.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going away.
Awesome. Man, you're great. I'm serious. I appreciate every time I sit with you.
I love spending time with you too.
It's wonderful, and I get to learn not just about Chemex and the poorly named coffee of choice for the Colletti household at the moment, but I just get to. I just here's what I hear today. There's a lot about our attention to who we are at work, not just what am I going to say on behalf of the gospel. A lot of it is who we are, who we bring. Because of who we represent and who we're formed by. So, man, thanks. Any parting words? Anything else you had maybe thought or prepped that you wanted to say today, Patrick?
One thought comes to mind, and this is, recently I've been traveling to New Orleans. My son's going to be attending school there next year. And I met a professor, and I've been reading his book, and there is a study in the book that a little strange, but hopefully worth a share. So in the study, they had participants come into a room one at a time. They shut the door behind them, they seated the person, and they told them they'd be right back and the study would begin. But in front of that person, about 4.5 feet away, was a fan, and the fan was blowing directly on their face. And so what the study was really designed to do was to measure what people would do when this annoying fan was blowing in their face. And predictably, there were two cohorts. Those that after a couple of seconds got up and either turned the fan off or they just adjusted the fan so it wasn't blowing in their face. And then the other group just sat there. And then about 8 minutes later, they would come back in and they would say, "Okay, the study's getting ready to start." And it was really just designed to see what happened.
It was all about the fan. The study happened.
It was all about the fan.
Okay.
And then they took another cohort and they said, okay, let's walk through what they would call a high power or high locus of control story. So something where that person felt really engaged and good about life and powerful about what they were doing. They ran the exact same study. And what they found was that the people that they had run through that story with, predictably, moved the fan or turned the fan off each time.
Wow.
And so that what they would call that high power group, the ones that had just heard a story that encouraged them and got them fired up, they were pretty quick to turn the fan off or to move it, Whereas in the original study, there was a bunch of people that simply didn't do that. They repeated the study with another group where they told them what would they would call a low power story. So something that was kind of a bummer and made them a little sad and not feel very powerful about life.
Right.
And predictably, they did not move the fan. They sat there with the fan blowing on them.
Yeah.
And as I was reading this study this weekend, I was thinking really about the gospel and our message. And when I listened to John's message, he talked about how reminding yourself of the story is like adrenaline in your body. I think he quoted the Message version that talked about adrenaline in our body if you recite the story. And, I just think about that. If we know what's true and what's good and we recite that story, we're apt to take action. And the only thing they were showing in the fan study was leaders are those that actually take action. They believe they can make an impact. And so I think what the fan story told me was that we're looking for people who are willing to turn the fan off or move the fan. And as John reminded me, if we've got that adrenaline because we're reminded of the story, we're going to actually take action.
So the gospel empowers us to lead differently.
Yep.
But we have to stay reminded of the gospel.
That's right.
So this is precisely what we're trying to do in this podcast. We're trying to reflect on topics to really dig deeper into those areas where we spend most of our time at work, in our marriages, with our kids, parenting, whether they're infants or whether they're grown adults halfway across the country, right? But I think what I'm always longing for us to model as part of discipleship here at Northway is to, how do you hear something with the lens for how's that going to make a difference in my life? And you just modeled that with what John said. John wasn't saying that, but that's the work of the Spirit, lensing it through work. And so I appreciate you. You have been a lovely guest, Patrick.
Thanks,
so
Dave.
Seriously, thank you so much for sharing and for unpacking some stuff and taking some time to deal with my annoying interruptions. And I'm an active listener, so if I'm not engaged in it, I'm like, I got to wrestle with it. So I appreciate you big time.
Thank you. I appreciate you too.
Thanks so much. Hey, we'll see you next time. Project 167 Podcast.